We are in the Spiderwick Chronicles Book 3, Lucinda's Secret, and today we will start with Chapter 4, in which the Grace children look for a friend. Jared pressed his face up to the car window and tried to pretend he wasn't crying. The tears fell hot against his cheeks. He let them run down the cool glass. He hadn't actually hit Mallory. Simon had grabbed his arms while Mallory kept insisting that she hadn't taken the guide. All the shouting had brought their mother in. She had dragged them out of there, with lots of apologizing to the nurse and even to Aunt Lucy, who had to be sedated. On the way to the car, his mom had told Jared he was lucky the people at the institution didn't lock him up. "Jared," Simon whispered, putting his hand on his twin's back. "What?" Jared mumbled, without turning. "Maybe Thimbletack took it." Jared swiveled around in his seat. His whole body went tense. The moment he heard it, he knew it had to be true. It was Thimbletack's latest prank, and his best revenge. His insides felt as though they'd been splashed with ice water. Why couldn't he have figured that out for himself? Sometimes he got so angry that it scared him. It was like his mind went blank and his body took over. When they got home, he slid out of the car and sat down on the back steps instead of going into the house with his mother. Mallory sat down beside him. "I didn't take it," she said. "Remember when we believed you? Now you better believe me." "I know," Jared replied, looking down. "I think it was Thimbletack. I'm sorry." "You think Thimbletack stole the guide?" she asked. "Simon figured it out," said Jared. "It makes sense. Thimbletack keeps playing pranks on me. This is just the worst one yet." Simon sat down next to Jared on the stairs. "It'll be okay. We'll find it." "Look," Mallory said, picking at the hem of her sweater where a thread had unraveled. "It's probably for the best." "No, it's not," Jared said. "Even you should see that. We can't give back what we don't have. The fairies didn't believe Aunt Lucinda when she said she didn't have the book. Why would they believe us?" Mallory scowled and didn't answer. "I was thinking," Simon said. "Aunt Lucy said that her dad abandoned them, right? But if the field guide was still hidden in the house, maybe he didn't leave on purpose. She said he would have never taken off without it." "Then how come the book was still hidden?" Jared asked. "If fairies captured him, he'd have told him where it was." "Maybe he split before any fairies could catch him," Mallory said. "Let Lucy catch all the heat. Maybe he knew about the giant thing." "Arthur wouldn't do that," Jared said. As soon as he said it, however, he wondered if it was true. "Come on," said Simon. "We're never going to figure this out. Let's go visit Byron. He's probably hungry again, and it will get our minds off the guide." Mallory snorted. "Yeah, visiting a griffin living in our barn will definitely make us forget all about a book of supernatural creatures." Jared smiled vaguely. He couldn't stop thinking about the book, about Aunt Lucy and Arthur, and about himself and Mallory and the anger he didn't know what to do with. Jared looked over at her. "I'm sorry I tried to hit you." Mallory ruffled his hair and stood up. "You hit like a girl anyway." "I do not," Jared said, but he got up and followed her and Simon inside with a grin. An old yellowed piece of paper was lying on the kitchen table. Jared took a step closer. A poem had been scribbled on it. "Thimbletack," Jared said. "Rash child who thinks he's smart, wondering about your book. Maybe I'm tearing it apart, or hiding it where you won't look." "Wow, he's really mad," said Simon. Jared was torn between relief and horror. The book was with Thimbletack, but what had he done with it? Had it really been destroyed? "Hey, I know," Mallory offered hopefully. "Aunt Lucy's jacks and marbles. We could leave them for him." "I'll write a note." Simon turned over the paper and scrawled something on the back. "What does it say?" Mallory asked. "We're sorry," read Simon. Jared eyed the note skeptically. "I'm not sure if that and a bunch of old toys will be enough." Simon shrugged. "You can't stay mad forever." Jared was afraid he could do exactly that. Byron was sleeping when they went to check on him, his feathery sides heaving with each breath. His eyes darted back and forth beneath shut lids. Simon pointed out that they probably shouldn't try to wake him, so they left another plate of meat by his beak and walked back to the house. Mallory suggested a game, but Jared was too nervous to do anything, except try to figure out where Thimbletack could have hidden the guide. He paced the living room, trying to think. Maybe it was like a riddle, with a way to solve the puzzle. He thought about the note again, turning it over in his mind, looking for clues. Can't be inside the walls. Mallory sat cross-legged on the couch. It's too big. How could he get it in there? There are lots of rooms we've never even been in, Simon said, perching next to her. Lots of places we haven't looked. Jared stopped mid-stride. Wait, what about right in front of us? What? Asked Simon. In Arthur's library. There are so many books up there, we would never notice it. Hey, that's true, Mallory said. Yeah, said Simon, and even if the guide isn't there, who knows what else we'll find? The three went upstairs into the hall and opened the closet door. Crouching down, Jared crawled through the secret passage underneath the lowest shelf and made his way into Arthur's library. The walls were lined with bookshelves, except for where a large painting of their great uncle hung. Despite their many visits to the library, dust still covered most of the bookshelves, a testament to how few of the volumes had been inspected closely. Mallory and Simon scrambled in behind him. Where do we start? Simon asked, looking around. You take the desk, Mallory said. Jared, you take that bookshelf, and I'll take the one over here. Jared nodded and tried to brush off some of the dust on the first shelf. The books were as strange as he remembered from previous trips to the library. Physiognomy of wings, impact of scales on musculature, venoms of the world, and details of draconite. When Jared had first looked at them, however, there had been kind of an awe that was absent now. He felt numb. The book was gone. Thimbletack hated him. And Arthur wasn't the person he imagined. It was a cheat, all this magic. It seemed so great, but underneath it was just as disappointing as everything else. Jared glanced over at the painting of Arthur hanging on the wall. He didn't even look nice to Jared anymore. The Arthur in the painting was thin-lipped with a crease between his brows that Jared now figured was annoyance. He was probably thinking about leaving his family even then. Jared's vision blurred and his eyes burned. It was stupid to cry over someone he had never met, but he couldn't help it. Did you sketch this? Simon called from the desk. Jared wiped his face against his sleeves, hoping his twin didn't notice the tears. Just toss it. No, Simon said, it's good. It really looks like Dad. Learning to draw had been another stupid idea. All it had done was get him in trouble at school for doodling instead of working. He walked to the desk and tore the drawing in half, crumpling it in his fists. Just toss it. Guys, Mallory said, come here. Mallory held several rolled up sheets of paper and two long metal tubes. Look. She knelt down and began unrolling pages on the floor. The boys crouched around. There, sketched in pencils and painted in watercolors, was a map of their neighborhood. Some places didn't look quite right. There were more houses and more roads now, but there were a lot of places they still recognized. The notes, however, were a surprise. There was a thin circle surrounding a stretch of forest beyond their house, with letters printed inside the circle. Troll hunting territory, Simon read. Mallory groaned. If only we had had this before. Along a stretch of road near an old quarry, dwarves was written, while a tree not far from the house was clearly marked sprites. The strange thing, however, was a note on the edge of the hills close to their house. It looked like it had been written hastily, as the handwriting was sloppy. It read, September 14th, 5 o'clock. Bring the remains of the book. What do you think it's about? Simon asked. Could the book mean the field guide? Jared wondered aloud. Mallory shook her head. Could be, but the guide was still here. They looked at each other for a moment in silence. When did Arthur disappear? Jared finally asked. Simon shrugged. Probably only Aunt Lucy would remember. So either he went to the meeting and never came back, Mallory said, or he took off and never went to the meeting at all. We have to show this to Aunt Lucinda, Jared said. His sister shook her head. It doesn't prove anything. It'll just make her more upset. But maybe he didn't mean to leave, Jared said with a scowl. Don't you think she deserves to know that? Let's go and look ourselves, Simon said. We can follow the map and see where it leads. Maybe there'll be some clue about what really happened. Jared hesitated. He wanted to go. He had been on the verge of suggesting it himself when Simon had spoken. Yet now he couldn't stop himself from wondering if it was some kind of trap. Following this map would be really, really dumb, said Mallory, especially if we think something might have happened to him out there. That map is so old, Mallory, Simon said. What could happen? Famous last words, Mallory said, but she traced the hills on the map thoughtfully with her fingers. It's the only way we will ever find out, said Jared. Mallory sighed. I guess we could take a look, as long as it's daytime. But the first weird thing we see, we go back. Agreed? Agreed, Jared said with a smile. Simon started to roll up the map. Agreed, he said. Chapter 5, in which there are many riddles and few answers. To Jared's surprise, their mother agreed to let them go for a short walk. She blamed their constant squabbling on being cooped up inside, but, with a single stern look at Jared, made all three promise to be back before dark. Mallory grabbed her fencing sword, Jared got his backpack and a new notebook, and Simon brought a butterfly net from the library. What is that for? Mallory asked as they crossed Dulac Drive, following the map. To catch things, Simon said, without looking at her directly. What kind of things? Don't you have enough animals? Simon shrugged. You bring home one new creature, and I'm feeding it to Byron. Hey, Jared said, interrupting them. Which direction? Simon studied the map, then pointed. Simon, Mallory, and Jared made their way up the steep hillside. Trees were sparse, their trunks growing on a slant between patches of grass and moss-covered boulders. For a long while they just climbed, not really talking. Jared thought that this might be a nice place to bring his sketchbook sometime, but then he remembered he had given up on drawing. Near the top of the hill, the land leveled out and the trees grew thicker. Simon turned around suddenly and started leading them back down the hill. Where are we going? Jared asked. Simon waved the map at him. This is the way, he said. Mallory nodded as though she didn't think it was unusual that they were retracing their steps. Are you sure? Jared asked. I don't think so. I'm sure, Simon said. Right then, a summer breeze blew across the hill, and Jared thought he heard a chorus of laughter from beneath their feet. He stumbled and almost fell. Did you hear that? What? Simon asked, looking around nervously. Jared shrugged. He was sure he had heard something, but now there was only silence. A little bit down the path, Simon changed direction again. He started walking back up and to the right. Mallory followed amiably. Where are we heading now? Jared asked. They were going up again, toward the top of the first hill, which was good, but they had been traveling at such an angle that Jared didn't think they could be anywhere close to the meeting spot on the map. I know what I'm doing, said Simon. Mallory followed without question, which bothered Jared almost as much as the zigzag pattern Simon was taking. He wished he had the guide. He tried to go through the pages in his mind, looking for some explanation. He recalled something about people losing their way, even really close to home. Jared began to poke the grass he stepped on with his shoe. One tall weed scuttled to the side. Stray sod. He thought of the entry in the guide. Suddenly it made sense that only he had noticed they were going in the wrong direction. Simon, Mallory, turn your shirts inside out, like mine. No, Simon said. I know the way. Why do you always have to boss me around? It's a fairy trick, Jared yelled. Forget it. You follow me for a change. Just do it, Simon. No, didn't you hear me? No. Jared tackled his brother, causing both of them to land on the grass. Jared tried to rip off his brother's sweater, but Simon was hugging his arms to his sides. Stop it, both of you. Mallory pushed them apart. Then, to Jared's surprise, she sat down on Simon and tugged off his sweater. He immediately noticed that she had already turned her own inside out. A strange expression came over Simon's face as his inside-out sweater was shoved back over his head. Wow. Where are we? A peal of laughter rang out from above their heads. Most don't make it this far, or this near, depending, said a creature perched in the tree. It had the body of a monkey, with a short, blackish-brown speckled fur and a long tail that curled around the branch on which it sat. A thick ruff of fur surrounded its neck, but its face was rabbity, with long ears and whiskers. Depending on what? Jared asked. He wasn't sure if he should be amused or afraid. Suddenly the creature swung his head upside down so that its ears brushed its belly and its chin pointed toward the sky. Clever is as clever does. Jared jumped. Mallory swung her rapier out in front of her. Stay where you are. Goodness. A beast with a sword, it hissed, swinging its head right ways round again. It blinked twice. I wonder if it's mad. Swords haven't been the fashion for ages. We're not beasts, said Jared defensively. What are you then? Asked the creature. I'm a boy, said Jared, and well, that's my sister, a girl. That's no girl, it said. Where's her dress? Dresses haven't been the fashion for ages, Mallory said with a smirk. We answered your questions, Jared said. Now answer ours. What are you? The black dog of the night, declared the creature proudly, before its head spun around once more, peering at them with an eye open. A donkey, or perhaps merely a sprite. What does that mean? Demanded Mallory. It's just stupid. I think it's a fuka, said Jared. Yes, I remember now. They're shapeshifters. Are they dangerous? Asked Simon. Very, said the fuka, nodding vigorously. I'm not sure, Jared said under his breath. Then, clearing his throat, he addressed the creature. We were looking for some trace of our great uncle. You've lost your uncle? How careless. Jared sighed and tried to decide if the fuka was as crazy as it seemed. Well, he's been gone a long time, actually, close to 70 years. We're just hoping to find out what happened to him. Anyone can live that long. All they have to do is keep from dying. But I understand that humans live much longer in captivity than they do in the wild. What? Jared asked. When looking for something, said the Fuka, one ought to be sure one wants to find it. Oh, never mind, Mallory said. Let's just keep going. Let's at least ask what's in the valley up ahead, said Simon. Mallory rolled her eyes. Oh, yeah, like it's going to start making sense? Simon ignored her. Can you please tell us what's up ahead? We were following this map until we got turned around by the moving grass. If grass can move, said the Fuka, then a boy could find himself rooted in place. Please, please stop encouraging it, said Mallory. Elves, said the Fuka, eyeing Mallory as though affronted. Shall I be direct when I direct you into the direct path of the elves? What do they want? Asked Jared. They have what you want, and they want what you have, said the Fuka. Mallory groaned audibly. We said we'd turn back when things got weird. Mallory pointed at the Fuka with her rapier. And that thing is about as weird as it gets. But not bad. Jared looked toward the hills. Let's go on a little farther. I don't know, Mallory said. What about those grass things and us getting lost? The Fuka said that the elves have what we want. Simon nodded. We're really close, Mal. Mallory sighed. I don't like this, but I'd rather we were the ones sneaking up on them. They started walking down the hill, away from the road. Wait! Come back, called the Fuka. There is something I must tell you. They turned back. What is it? Jared asked. Bonnie naughty Bonnie, said the Fuka with precision. Is that what you wanted to tell us? No, not at all, said the Fuka. Well, what then? Jared demanded. What an author doesn't know could fill a book, said the Fuka. With that, his body towed its way up the tree until it was gone. The three children made their way slowly down the other side of the hill. As the trees thickened once more, they noticed how quiet the woods had become. No birds sang in the trees. There seemed to be only the rustle of grass and the snap of twigs under their feet. They stopped in a meadow ringed by trees. At the center, a single tall thorn tree stood, surrounded by fat white and red toadstools. Uh, Jared said. Right, weird. Let's get out of here, Mallory said. But as they turned, the trees wove together, branches entwining with other branches, lacing into a fence of foliage that reached down to the earthen floor of the glade. Oh crap, said Mallory. Chapter 6, in which Jared fulfills the Fuka's prediction. Do you remember what he predicted? If grasses can move, what could happen to a boy? Just saying. Across the grove, the branches parted, and three beings stepped out from the trees. They were about Mallory's size, with freckled skin browned by sunlight. The first was a woman with apple green eyes and a green sheen across her shoulders and at her temples. Leaves were tangled in her tousled hair. The second was a man with what looked like small horns along his brow. His skin was flushed a deeper green than the woman's skin, and he held a gnarled staff in his hands. The third elf had thick red hair woven with red berries and two large seed pods that stuck up on either side of his head. His skin was brown, speckled with red at his throat. "These are elves?" Simon asked. "No one has followed this path for a long time," said the green-eyed elf, as though no one had spoken. She held her head high, like one accustomed to being obeyed. "All who might have stumbled into this grove have been led astray, but here they are. How curious." "The grass," Jared whispered to his brother. "They must have it," the red-haired elf declared to his companions. "How else would they come this way? How else would they discover the means to stay on the path?" He turned to the three children. "I am Lorengorm. We would bargain with you." "For what?" Jared asked, hoping his voice wouldn't shake. The elves were beautiful, but the only emotion he could read on their faces was a strange hunger that unnerved him. "You want your freedom," said the elf with what had looked like horns. Jared realized they were actually leaves. "We want Arthur's book." "Freedom from what?" Mallory asked. The leaf-horned elf indicated the border of trees with one hand and smiled an unkind smile. "We will guest you until you tire of our hospitality." "Arthur didn't give you the book. Why should we?" Jared hoped they couldn't tell that he was guessing. The leaf-horned elf sniffed. "We have long known that mankind is brutal. Once, at least, humans were ignorant. Now we would keep knowledge of our existence from you to protect ourselves." "You cannot be trusted. You cleave the forests." Lorengorm scowled and his eyes flashed. "Poison the rivers, hunt the griffins from the skies and the serpents from the seas. Imagine what you could do if you knew all of our weaknesses." "But we never did any of those things," said Simon. "And no one believes in fairies," Jared said. He thought of Lucinda. "No one sane, anyway." Lorengorm's laugh sounded hollow. "There are few enough fairies left to believe in. We make our homes in the sparse forests left to us. Soon even those will be gone." The green-eyed elf lifted one hand toward the woven wall of branches. "Let me show you." Jared noticed all types of fairies sitting in the circle of trees, peering through the gaps in the wood. Their black eyes glittered, their wings buzzed, and their mouths moved, but none entered the grove. It felt like a trial, with the elves acting as both judge and jury. Then a few branches untwined, and something else stepped through. It was white and the size of a deer. Its fur was ivory, and its long mane hung in tangles. The horn that jutted from its forehead was twisted to an end that looked sharp. It lifted its wet nose and scented the air. As it approached them, the valley went quiet. Even the creature's own steps were noiseless. It didn't look at all tame. Mallory stepped toward it, tilting her head slightly and extending her hand. "Mallory," Jared warned, "don't." But she was beyond hearing, stretching out her fingers to pet the creature's flank. It stayed completely still, and Jared was afraid to even breathe as Mallory stroked the unicorn's side, then tangled her hand in its mane. As she did, the bone horn touched her forehead, and her eyes closed. Then her whole body began to tremble. "Mallory," Jared said. Beneath the lids, Mallory's eyes darted back and forth as though she were dreaming. Then she staggered to her knees. Jared ran forward to grab her. Simon was only a step behind him. When Jared touched Mallory, he was drawn into the vision. Everything soundless. Knots of blackberry bushes, men on horseback, lean dogs with red tongues. A glimmer of white and a unicorn burst through the glade, legs already dark with mud. Arrows fly, burying themselves in white flesh. The unicorn bellows and goes down in a cloud of leaves. Dog's teeth rip skin. A man with a knife hacks the horn from the head while the unicorn is still moving. The images came faster then, more disjointed. A girl in a colorless gown, urged on by hunters, lures the unicorn closer. One stray arrow knocks her to the ground. She falls, pale arm slung over pale flank. Both are still. Then hundreds of gory horns, shaped into goblets, crushed into charms and powders, white pelt streaked with blood, stacked in a pile buzzing with black flies. Jared pulled free of the dream, his stomach heaving. To his surprise, Mallory was crying, her tears darkening the white fur. Simon put an awkward hand on the unicorn's side. The unicorn tipped its head forward, nuzzling Mallory's hair with its lips. Really likes you, Simon said. He looked a little annoyed. Animals usually liked him best. Mallory shrugged. I'm a girl. We know what you saw, the leaf-horned elf said. Give us the guide. It must be destroyed. What about the goblins? Demanded Jared. What of them? The goblins love your world, said Lorengorm. Your machines and poisons have made a haven for their kind. You seemed fine with using them to try to take the book from us, Jared said. We? Asked the green-eyed elf, her eyes wide and her mouth hard. You think that we would send such sentries? It is Mulgarath that commands them. Who is Mulgarath? Mallory stood up, still petting the unicorn absently. An ogre, said Lorengorm. He has been gathering goblins to him and making pacts with dwarves. We think he wants Arthur Spiderwick's guide for himself. Why? Jared asked. Don't you know everything that's inside it? The elves exchanged uncomfortable glances. Finally, the leaf-horned elf spoke. We make art. We do not feel the need to cut things apart to see what they're made of. What Arthur Spiderwick did, none of our kind would do. The green-eyed elf put a hand on the other elf's shoulder. What he means is, there may be things in the guide that we do not know. Jared thought for a moment. So you don't really care about humans getting Arthur's field guide. You just don't want Mulgarath to have it. The book is dangerous in anyone's hands, said the green-eyed elf. There is too much knowledge therein. Give it over to us. It will be destroyed, and you will be rewarded. Jared held out his hands. We don't have it, he said. We couldn't give it to you if we wanted to. The leaf-horned elf shook his head and slammed the butt of his staff. You lie. We really don't have it, said Mallory. Honest. Lorengorm raised a single red brow. Then where is it? We think the house brownie has it, Simon put it in, but we're not sure. You lost it? The green-eyed elf gasped. Thimbletack probably has it, Jared said in a small voice. We have tried to be reasonable, said the leaf-horned elf. Humans are faithless. Faithless? Jared repeated. How do we know we can trust you? He snatched the map from Simon and held it up for the elves to see. We found this. It was Arthur's. It looks like he came here, and I guess he met you. I want to know what you did with him. We spoke with Arthur, said the leaf-horned elf. He thought to trick us. He had sworn he would destroy the guide, and he came to our meeting with a bag of blackened paper and ashes. But he lied. He had burned another book. The guide remained unharmed. We honor our word, said the green-eyed elf. Though it be bitter, we fulfill our pledges. We have no sympathy for those who would deceive us. What did you do? Asked Jared. We kept him from doing further harm, said the green-eyed elf. Now you have come, said the leaf-horned elf, and you will bring us the guide. Lorengorm waved his hand, and pale roots crept from the ground. Jared cried out, but his voice was lost in the creaking of branches and the shuffling of leaves. The trees were untwining, their limbs moving back into natural shapes, but dirty, hairy roots climbed Jared's legs and held him. Bring us the guide, or your brother will remain trapped forever in Fairy, said the leaf-horned elf, and Jared had no doubt that he meant it. So if grasses move, boys may find themselves rooted to the ground. That's what the Fuca said. Chapter 7, in which Jared is finally pleased to have a twin. Mallory leapt forward, brandishing her rapier. Simon held his net in awkward imitation. The unicorn shook its head, mane flying as it galloped noiselessly into the depths of the forest. Oh, said the leaf-horned elf. Now we see the true characters of humans. Let my brother go, Mallory yelled. Jared suddenly had an idea. Jared, help! Jared called, hoping that Simon and Mallory would get the hint. Simon just looked at him in confusion. Jared, said Jared, you have to help me. Then Simon smiled at him, his eyes lighting up with understanding. Simon, are you okay? I'm fine, Jared. Jared pulled his leg against the grip of the roots with all his might. But I can't move. We'll come back with the guide, Simon, Simon said, and then they'll have to let you go. No, said Jared. If you come back, they might keep us all hostage. Make them promise. Our word is our bond, sniffed the green-eyed elf. You didn't give us your word, Mallory said, looking at her brothers with growing alarm. Promise that Jared and Mallory can leave the grove safely, and that if they return they will not be held against their will, said Jared. Mallory looked ready to protest, but she remained silent. The elves looked at the siblings with some hesitation. Finally, Lorengorm nodded. Let it be so. Jared and Mallory may go from this grove. They will not be held here against their will now or later. Should they not bring the guide, we will keep their brother Simon for all time. He will remain with us, ageless, beneath the hill, for 100 times 100 years. And should he never ever leave, one step on the ground will bring all the missing years onto him at once. The real Simon shivered and took a step closer to Mallory. Go, swiftly, said the elf. Mallory looked searchingly at Jared. The tip of her rapier had dipped, but she was still holding it in front of her, and she made no move to leave the grove. Jared tried to smile encouragingly, but he was scared, and he knew it showed on his face. Shaking her head, Mallory followed Simon. After a few paces they turned and looked back at him, then started climbing the steep hill. In a few minutes they were obscured by leaves. Jared spoke. You have to let me go, he said. And why is that? Asked the leaf-horned elf. You have heard our promise. We will not release you until your brother and sister have brought us the guide. Jared shook his head. You said you wouldn't release Simon. I'm Jared. What? Demanded Lorengorm. The leaf-horned elf took a step toward Jared, his hands curled like claws. Jared swallowed hard. Your word is your bond. You have to let me go. Prove yourself, child, said the green-eyed elf, her lips pressed in a thin line. Here. Jared shrugged off his backpack into his trembling hands. There, along the top, 3 letters were monogrammed into the red canvas. J-E-G. See? Jared, Evan, Grace. Go, said the leaf-horned elf, speaking the word as though it were a curse. Much may your freedom please you if we come upon you or your false-hearted siblings again. With that, the roots untwined from Jared's legs. He ran from the grove as fast as he could. He did not look back. As he reached the top of the hill, he heard laughter. He looked up into the nearby trees, but there was no sign of the Fuca. Still, Jared was only half surprised when its now familiar voice spoke. I see you didn't find your uncle. A pity. Were you a little less clever, perhaps you'd have had more success. Jared shuddered and rushed down the other side of the hill, fast enough that he was barely able to stop from running out into the middle of the road. He crossed the street and ran through the iron gates into his own front yard, panting. Mallory and Simon were waiting for him on the steps. His sister said nothing, but embraced him in a very un-Mallory-like fashion. He let himself be hugged. I had no idea what you were going to do, said Simon with a laugh. That was a great trick. Thanks for going along with it, Jared said with a grin. The Fuca said something to me on the way back. Anything that made any sense? Mallory asked. Well, I was thinking, said Jared. Remember how the elves said they'd keep me in Fairy? Keep you? Asked Simon. They said Simon. Yeah, but think of what they were going to do. They were going to keep me there forever. Ageless, remember? Forever. So you think, Mallory's voice trailed off. When I was leaving, the Fuca said that if I had been less clever, I might have had more success finding my uncle. You mean Arthur could be trapped with the elves? Asked Simon as they trudged up the steps to the house. I think so, Jared said. Then he's still alive, Mallory said. Jared opened the back door and stepped into the mudroom. He was still shaking from his encounter with the elves, but the smile on his face grew. Maybe Arthur hadn't run out on his family. Maybe he was a prisoner of the elves, and maybe, if Jared was clever enough, Arthur could even be saved. Daydreaming about rescue, he barely noticed the glimmer of silver at his feet before he fell. Something sharp pressed into Jared's thigh and outstretched hand. Simon tripped too, crashing onto Jared, and Mallory, only a couple of steps behind, went down on top of them. Crap, yelled Jared, looking around. The floor was littered with jacks and marbles. Ow, said Simon, trying to squirm out from under his sister. Get off me, Mal. Ow yourself, Mallory said, pushing herself to her feet. I'm going to kill that little boggart. She paused. You know what, Jared? If we find Arthur's field guide, I say we keep it. Jared looked back at her. You do? She nodded. I don't know about you two, but I'm tired of being bossed around by fairies.